Since we're already talking about the Trump administration, let's talk about the effect and the impact that President Trump's immigration policies are having on scholars. Again, you think of U.S. universities certainly as being a place of refuge and sanctuary for scholars, for example, from Iran, which is one of the 7 countries being impacted by Trump's re-examination of travelers and immigrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. What impact has that had on the work that Scholars at Risk does?
Well, so the first thing you have to say about the order is obviously it's very broad. It's affecting many populations other than just scholars and students, so I want to acknowledge that. But scholars and students are centrally impacted by the order. First and foremost, those who are directly affected. Our first effort was, who do we know that we've worked with to assist that's in motion at the moment? Is anybody trapped outside the country that's based here, and how do we get them back? How do we make sure their families are okay? And so I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is whatever one's blue on the policies, the manner in which this was done was cruel. It caused tremendous emotional harm to families worried about whether they would be separated for very, very long periods of time, when there was no factual basis that these families posed any risk whatsoever.
I mean, a lot of these academics were already based here, so maybe they had gone on vacation or gone just to visit home, and then some of them had a hard time coming back.
Exactly right. And so our program is to give them a place where they can work, right? And the great irony is, say you mentioned Iran, so we have a country where they have arrested a number of scholars who have gone to Iran to do work that benefits Iran, and yet they arrest them when they try to leave the country, and they charge them with various things so that they can't leave. That's a state making an arbitrary interference with the academic exchange, with the academic exercise, largely for a domestic political audience. And by no means am I saying a direct comparison between Iran and the United States, but if you look at the executive order and its impact on universities, it's fundamentally an arbitrary exercise of state power, ostensibly to serve a domestic political constituency without an evidentiary base that really justifies it. So our first concern was obviously on the direct impact on immediate individuals. Our next level of concern is, what will that mean for scholars who are here, the scholars that we've tried to help? And by the way, this isn't just for the 7 countries that are directly named in the order, because the administration has already said they could well add other countries to the list. So what it really says is to all immigrants, scholars, students, really all people who are on a temporary status in the US, don't go anywhere, because they really can't risk crossing the border right now. So that level of uncertainty is, again, deeply humanly hard for them to deal with. It also is deeply damaging to their work. So it means you can't go to that conference. It means you can't go to that event where you could speak truth about what's going on in Syria or so forth, in Iraq and so on. And then number 3 is, what about those who are outside, who normally would come here to do work? And that could be foreigners from some of these countries, but it really could be foreigners from anywhere in the world who might normally come to US universities, US campuses, US research parks, US industry, and flow back and forth, sharing information that's really good for Americans to have. But they're going to say, you know what, we can't do the meeting in the US because many of our colleagues can't get there. So they're going to move those meetings to other places. They're going to base those projects in other places. And students and researchers are going to say, maybe I can't trust having my career in the US because I don't know how stable that will be.
It just sounds disastrous from the way you describe both the short-term effects on people and the long-term effects on scholarship and on cultural and educational exchange.
I don't want to overstate it, but one has to understand that academia, education, and the industries that grow out of it are by definition long-term investments. And so if we look at this in a commercial narrative, any industry that's looking at long-term investment has to look at risk. And an arbitrary order that suddenly slams the door, literally while people are flying from one place to another, is an unprecedented statement that there's a new risk regime around this space. And so that's a very, very severe and serious thing that those who will be thinking long-term need to address. Am I saying it's irreparable? No, I'm not ready to say that yet, but I'm saying that no matter what happens in the courts about this particular order, the willingness of the administration to both play gotcha and use an extremely broad brush will have long-term consequences.